Thank you very much. Like other participants, I would like to thank Said and Haide. And it's with very pride and pleasure for me to be here among you. Before I start my article, I refer to what happened in 1st of May in one of the parks in Tehran. The security forces and law enforcement attacked people, attacked workers by bloodshed, put them in jail, and with quite aggressively, and many of them still are in jail, and some released by bails equal to 5,200 million tuman. And what I want to say is that what has happened in that park was not because or exclusively and basically because of fundamentalism. It was because of class conflict in our society. Capital accumulation and formation of a new capitalist class started after the revolution and when royal state comprador capitalism left the Iranian economic scene, except for a small part of minor capitalism. This accumulation took place in late 1984, which was the same year for military stabilization of both parties in Iran-Iraq war, and after the end of the first violent encounters against opponents of government. But in fact, the seed of capitalism by the government, clerics, organizations, and political and ideological activists were planted since the early days after the revolution. These seeds were irrigated by confiscated resources and grew with formation of military and political groups and power and corruption networks. During the war, a group of bazaar merchants who were organizing and financing anti-royalist activities and faithful to Islamic leaders gained enormous economic power due to their political background and their relationship with high-ranking clergies. By possessing high-ranking and critical economic and administrative positions, this group penetrated the distribution and import networks and added to their wealth. However, other factions in the most high-ranking posts also exploited the governmental investments. Until the end of the war and the demise of the supreme leader of the revolution, 1988 and 1989, after which market economic policies and free trade and structural adjustment policies were officially accepted and still is continued with its up and downs. The power structure and sovereignty were divided into three main sectors. And I forget the explanation about these sectors because short of time. Anyhow, a number of capital accumulation currents which had class conflicts from the very beginning emerged from within these rival but intensely dependent groups that had the same interest in issues like the war and oppression of opponents. This contradiction increased especially during the appearance of problems and deficits. One, bazaar-related conservative capitalism. Next, state capitalism. Next, newly founded industrial capitalism. Next, urban state and asset capitalism, and other minor and less significant types of capitalism in services and production sector. Some results was the following. Creation of oligarchic and monopolistic economic poles. Reinforcement of big monopolistic institutions, which were neither private nor state-run nor subject to auditing and worked and grew only under the command of the new leader. These institutions took control and still have over urban state, hotels, mines, industries, shipping lines, and exports and import licenses. Compilation of development projects which did not have any significant effect on steady growth and comprehensive development. These projects were being implemented with cost many times more than standard costs. Next, establishment of new industrial units of restoration of former units in steel, petrochemical, machinery, household industries, and car manufacturing, which were short of the essential efficiency for competition and industrial chain growth. Their partnership with state managers and political and ideological influential individuals turned them into a major rentiers with semi-monopolized and extraordinary interests. Next, industries under possession of government or state managers which benefited from financial facilities and support of the government and state policies. After intentionally becoming indebted and bankruptcy, these units were handed over to state managers and the government's cleric, military and political partners. Jerry-building networks and expensive residential and commercial high-rise projects belonging to influential construction companies and their hidden government partners. Next, sudden increase of foreign debts to almost 50% of GNP and 35 times more than non-petroleum exports. The people are still feeling the gigantic load of these debts on their shoulders. Next, currently 25% of the 73 million population of country lives in Tehran metropolis and 8 other big cities. 10 to 15% of the big luxury apartments and villas in Tehran and Caspian Sea coast have remained empty. But at the same time, about 10 million people, or about 2 million households, in big cities live in exhausted urban neighborhoods, in houses with 30 to 40 square meter area and without secure foundations and structure, and in narrow and inaccessible streets and alleys, and worse condition of service and health care. Structural adjustment policies continued for 16 years during Rafsanjani and Khatami's governments. Despite the drastic effects of these policies on bringing about poverty and uneven distribution of income and wealth, and its little effect on sustainable human and comprehensive development, there was no or little control over them. Owners of political and economic power were against such controls. During the 8-year presidency of Khatami, opportunities were lost one after the other. Bazar, military and conservative factions strengthened themselves. During the last year of Khatami's government, oppression and encounters against critics, protesters, organizations, and circles continued. Structural adjustment policies, especially during Rafsanjani's presidency, let inflation rate grow to an average figure of 25% and sometimes even to 50%. Administrative and financial corruption intensified, and distribution of wealth and income found more inappropriate condition. Owners of powers continued oppression and domination by perpetually relying on their, thank you very much. Relying on their sanctified ideology, religion, and people's belief, and the vast network of clergy and mosques. Extensive and complex security organizations and Basij, which is a great armed party, were used to implement this mission. The satisfaction of urban middle-class intellectuals and well-educated groups prepared the ground for process of reforms, but due to the intensive affiliation of leadership of reforms to the ruling political system and ideology, it could neither establish people's will nor could it prevent the concentration of power and expansion of corruption. During Khatami's second term of presidency, economic imbalance, injustice, corruption, and movements by conservative and military forces increased, and the social gap became more serious. The main result of this period was as following. Economic infrastructures, especially in transportation and urban development, in number of big cities were expanded and increased with high costs, many times more than the predicted figure in programs. Housing development rose and the number of houses per number of households increased. However, accumulative deal growth, excessive wealth was gathered, and luxury houses were left uninhabited. Laborers and the poor got increasingly deprived of proper housing. Houses in rural areas did not experience proper growth and quality. In North Tehran, the entire gardens and mountains areas were replaced by expensive houses and high-rises and were destroyed. With every unoccupied flat in these high-rises, one can build an average of 30 modest houses for laborers. Stock exchange and financial deals, and usually something strongly prohibited in Islam, deserving highest penalties, increased with special support of the government. Annual interest rate in parallel market is 45%, which imposes heavy pressure on households' economic condition. But banking interest rate for long-term loans to investors was 25% and now is 12%. Monetary resources were allocated to capitalists and the rich. Next, government units were transferred to the private sector, affiliated to government managers and clerics. Next, inflation rate is still high and has reached an average of 20% during the past 12 years. Due to political reasons, the unemployment rate is evaluated much less than its real figure. In reality, it is 18% for the whole economy and 25% in unprivileged areas. The real wage of a major part of laborers decreased or remained stable, and only a limited group of professional workers have better condition. Administrative and financial corruption continues. The entire promises of politicians for fighting corruption are lost against defensive position taken by owners of powers. Some opportunities for freedom of press and limited social freedoms could not provide democratic and working class circles with any chance to grow. The poor and workers in cities and villages could not have an effective resistance against authoritarian, profiteering and anti-worker policies. Since near the end of second term of Khatami's presidency, oppression and security and military pursuits, which had temporarily reduced, started once again. Distribution of wealth and income became more unjust. Military power of the country increased. Enormous resources were allocated to military purchases. The reformist government approved this increase. Khatami's reformist government deprived the people of opportunities for a social movement and did not let them express their economic demands. At the same time, continuation of structural adjustment policies resulted in general economic deficiency and the increase of social gap. The factors disappointed the people of the future of the reform was as follows: 4 to 4.5 million unemployed and high inflation. Continuation of the decrease of the real wages of workers and state employees and service sector employees' salaries. Political and social pressure. Social disorder, especially offenses and addiction among the youth. Fluctuation of prices of agricultural products and fluctuation of limited income of farmers. The privation of middle class, especially teachers and low-ranking employees. Khatami's severe dependence on the existing political and ideological structure and his opposition to popular organization that has risen to support him added to this disappointment. Continuance of corruption and vagueness of outcomes of economic and political measures in the absence of trade unions and guild organizations as well as social awareness prepared the ground for appearance of calculated political and economic populism in Ahmadinejad's government. Practicing demagogy, Ahmadinejad attributed himself to leftist and justice-seeking faction, and his Islamic neoliberal opponents did the same. But the truth was that Ahmadinejad, who entered the election scene with populist method to give more power to the military and guard corps, gained the support. Of course, the main factor of his victory was central power's interference and support as well as electoral manipulation in his favor, but he gained some vote as well. People's avoidance of Rafsanjani's policies and his new power and their disappointment in reforms was among the main factors that let Ahmadinejad win. But under the shadow of populism and demagogy, his main mission was to strengthen militaristic capitalism, which felt defeated in social, political, and economic sense. After the war and during the past 16 years, Ahmadinejad was the representative of Guards Corps. During the almost 4 years period of his presidency, some covers or in fact superficial changes were chosen for structural adjustment policy, but the basis of the policy did not change. Ahmadinejad's goal was to stop or reduce the existing capitalist sector's access to public resources and to transfer these resources to militaristic capitalism and, of course, its affiliated state and private partners. Rafsanjani's defensive position and introduction of a new candidate by him, Mir Hossein Mousavi, and his effort to establish a front of fundamentalists against Ahmadinejad are all organized from their intention for financial gain and power. Mir Hossein Mousavi is not the representative of democratic economy, independent planning, and laborers faction. He is affiliated to Rafsanjani and his allies among fundamentalists against Ahmadinejad and is only superficially reformist. Among candidates, Karoubi is mainly representative of some parts of clergies and Islamic neoliberals and is affiliated to Rafsanjani as well. All of these governments are extremely against independent organizations, syndicates, and circles, against ambition of workers, against independent intellectualism and growth of awareness, and against left and socialists. The following outcomes were resulted during Ahmadinejad's presidency. Development projects continued to be implemented. Infrastructures grew, but the speed of growth seriously declined. Distribution of wealth and income among former owners of powers was somehow moderated, but it increased among those new in power and assets. Thank you very much. 3 minutes is good. It's good, it's enough. Unemployment rate increased and distribution of financial resources and capitals among parts of lower layers, as well as capitalists close to Ahmadinejad's government, did not prevent the increase of this rate. The reduction of real salary and wage of large group of workers and state and service sector employees intensely continued. Inflation rate became unbeatable. Poverty increased, and at the same time, uneven distribution of income did not change. Hopes have been created among farmers, villages, and citizens of small towns, but stagnation, drought, and deficiency of subsidies prevented these hopes from getting serious. Brain drain and escape of capital increase. According to studies during the past 2 or 3 years, an average of $1 billion has left the country on a monthly basis. In methodical use and consumption of oil income and foreign exchange reserve has drastically increased. A new round of oppression, prosecution, and arrest of freedom lovers, writers, labor activists, students, and women activists started and expanded. Due to financial problems and absence of economic consultation, moves toward omission of subsidies and control over consumption under attractive covers like cash payment of subsidies started, all of which damaged the poor and working class seriously. The homeless are still living in tough condition. Economic conflict has emerged as follows. When due to the price drop, the homeless found a little hope. Construction companies and jerry builders along the bazaar merchants start to protest and stop investment because they found their interest under threat, and then those hopes disappear. Military budget and strength and military institutions, capitalism and import of armaments significantly increased, and related industries were expanded and reinforced. Economy found a totally seesaw forms. Economy found a totally seesaw forms, where none of its sides reached the ground. In this economic seesaw, one side is unemployment and the other inflation. When inflation rate increases and damages the people, unemployment falls, but never goes less than 12%. When unemployment grows, inflation does not go below 15%. Iranian economy is not affected by stagflation, but is inflicted by reflation. That is repression plus inflation. Now we are reaching the end of Ahmadinejad's presidential term. The Majlis or Parliament turned into battlefields of representatives of these factions. Of course, it was formally decided that Majlis be in the hand of the sovereignty. The Majlis was supposed to legislate current affairs, but it turned into arena of encounter of class interests of the powers. During Ahmadinejad's government, military power gained more economic strength. Islamic neoliberal factions, bazaar and clergy faced a demotion of power and status. The country found an intensified security and military environment. Foreign relations and the issue of uranium enrichment turned into a means of survival of the major parts of power. The main intention for arrangement of electoral candidate is also to gain the same economic and political power. There is no sign of sound, fair, free, and democratic election. Real programs for reforms, freedom, justice, and growth are not offered. At the same time, the entire factions are affiliated to the center of political and ideological power and have to pass the approbatory supervision filtered by selected clerics. Everything is boasting about their loyalty to some part of the system. The perspective of reconciliation between Iran and America may result in some changes in nuclear policies and military and security performance of Iran, but does not have the potential to bring about sustainable and comprehensive political, economic, and social development. Issues like poverty, frustration, and human rights are totally absent in President Obama's green light. Former American administration looked for its allies here and there. That government did not pay attention to or was even hostile to popular demands, working class wants, and human rights, which took shape in the will of freedom lovers, justice seekers, and combatants. Current American administration is looking for allies within the Islamic Republic sovereignty with the foresight background in whatever faction. Neither the American methods nor the forthcoming elections create any hope for solution to these deep structural dilemmas. The only hope is formation of independent, popular, democratic currents and growth of a leftist coalition moved together with democratic forces of workers' move and other forces and women activists and to some extent student activists. The start of this movement is not in encountering the starting point. The start of this movement is not in encountering and confronting ideology and sacred values and false conscience, but to concentrate on real aspects and common social pains and to abandon domestic and foreign governments' self-appointed rescue forces. Thank you very much.